Camera speed.
Sound production, take one.
Action!
Welcome to From Beneath the Hollywood Sign. If you love old movies, Hollywood history, or the golden age of filmmaking, you've come to the right place. This is the podcast that talks about amazing stories of Tinseltown from another era. Hear fascinating conversations with writer-producer Steve Cubine, who quite literally lives just beneath the Hollywood sign, and actress-writer Nan McNamara. Now your hosts, Steve and Nan.
Hey everybody, welcome back for another episode of From Beneath the Hollywood Sign, and I'm really excited about the person that we're going to be talking about today. Just to kind of introduce her, one of my favorite Broadway musicals is Follies by Stephen Sondheim.
Yeah.
Love it. There's one particular song in Follies called Broadway Baby, and one of the lyrics, and I love this lyric, it says, "Heck, I'd even play the maid to be in a show." Well, that line implies that to an actor, playing a maid is sort of a come down from playing other parts. But still, if you want to act, you take whatever you can get. Well, what if you worked in an era when playing the maid was your only option?
Right.
Well, that's what faced today's subject, THERESA Harris, when she first started her film career in the late 1920s and the early 1930s. It was a time when the only Hollywood roles for African Americans were either mammies or servants or maids or prostitutes or tribal women. I love that.
Yeah, right.
The choices of roles were just not there for people of color. And Miss Harris, this also kind of played against her. She didn't actually fit into any of these categories because she had leading lady looks, she had a velvety singing voice, and she was a real wonderful dancer. I mean, she really was a triple threat. And under any other era, she would have been a star. But because of the restrictions of Hollywood back in those days, she just had to cobble together a career the best she could.
And that's what we're going to talk about, is her life and career. It's another thing that I love that you highlighted originally in your blog, because so many people don't know the name THERESA Harris. You'll have seen her in films, but you don't necessarily know who she is. And so it's wonderful to get the chance to talk about her.
Yeah, THERESA Harris, she appeared in over 100 movies, yet she seldom got screen credit for these movies, which is just criminal.
Yeah.
We were just talking about probably back in those days, she did not have an advocate for her, an agent or someone like that who was fighting for her to make sure she got screen credit, so she didn't.
And she was never under contract to a studio. So as you mentioned, she was freelancing. And perhaps if she had been under contract, that might have helped somewhat, but to be in over 100 films and to have many of them not be credited is criminal.
Yes, and I just said this, whenever she appeared on screen, whether it's a tiny role as a maid or it's a waitress, whatever it was, she had such a light to her that you couldn't take your eyes off of her.
True.
And and albeit because of the parts available to her, she often played the maid to some of Hollywood's biggest stars, including Barbara Stanwyck and Ginger Rogers, Myrna Loy, Frances D., Marlene Dietrich, Betty Davis, Maureen O'Sullivan, Billy Burke, Ellen Drew, Gloria Graham, Arlene Dahl. That's just to name a few.
Yes.
She ended up working for almost every prestigious director in town also, which is interesting about her career. She worked with Joseph von Sternberg and John Ford and Mervyn LeRoy, Busby Berkeley, Woody Van Dyke, William Wyler, George Cukor, Orson Welles, even Otto Preminger and Alfred Hitchcock. I mean, she literally worked with every major director there was.
Yes.
And I think these directors were drawn to her because she was just different. She had this beauty and she had this raw sensuality that often rivaled the leading lady.
Yes.
And I don't think Hollywood knew exactly what to do with the talented THERESA Harris, which is really a shame.
It really is. It really is. Let's start at the very beginning. She was born on New Year's Eve. Two different reports of the year she was born. Some say 1906, some say 1909. In Houston, Texas, and her parents were former sharecroppers.
And her mom ended up being a teacher, though, and at one point she thought she was going to be a teacher and follow in her mom's footsteps. But she got bitten by the acting bug like so many others.
Yeah, and she and her family, when she was 11 years old, moved out to Los Angeles, which would have made that much more accessible for her. Obviously, she graduated from Jefferson High School, and after high school, she studied music.
And she really wanted to be a singer, and I think that's why she studied voice and music.
She studied music extensively. Some accounts have her studying at USC Conservatory of Music, others say UCLA Conservatory of Music. But in addition to that, Zollner's Conservatory of Music was another place that she studied. So she was a very serious
Yeah, I think she was really dedicated to trying to just cultivate her talent, which
Right.
is amazing. And the fact that of that era, a woman of color had the opportunity to do that is fantastic.
Right. She then joined an African American musical comedy theater troupe called the Lafayette Players. So she was continuing to work on her singing and acting and dancing, and boy, is it evident when you see her on screen.
Oh, she's just luminous.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We know she got her first big break in 1929 when she was cast in the film Thunderbolt, directed by Joseph von Sternberg and starring George Brent and Fay Wray. And in this movie, she gets to sing this lamenting song, Daddy, Won't You Please Come Home? And there's a great clip of this on YouTube if you guys want to check it out.
Yeah.
And the minute you see her in this clip, you'll know what we're talking about. The charisma and the sensuality and the beauty this woman had was just mind-blowing.
Yeah, well said. She enters the 30s, and as you wrote in your original blog, she starts the maid phase.
Oh, the maid phase.
So it gives her very little to do, but she's opposite, as you mentioned, some of Hollywood's greatest stars. I mean, her first featured role was with Jean Harlow and Clark Gable.
And Clark Gable.
In Hold Your Man in 1932.
Yeah.
Now, Harlow is sent to a reformatory and is befriended by Harris's character, Lily Mae Crippen, who's a preacher's daughter who gives her some hard truths about a wayward life. I mean, even that is such a trope.
Yeah, it is. Like the hardened convict who's going to show the newbie the way.
Yeah, show the newbie the ropes. Right after that, in 1933, she makes a film that to this day really stands out as one of her best performances.
Yeah, this was a pivotal role for THERESA Harris. This was the movie Babyface, as you mentioned, from 1933. And anyone who's seen this sexy pre-code film, which starred Barbara Stanwyck as Lily Powers, a poor, uneducated woman who claws her way to the top of society one bed at a time.
Was that on the movie poster?
Exactly. Hey, there's a great log line right there. But if you've seen this movie, you absolutely will remember THERESA Harris because she played the just as beautiful and just as alluring friend Chico.
Yes.
Who's a woman who works in the sleazy gin joint owned by Barbara Stanwyck's abusive father. And in the opening scene, Stanwyck's father is going to fire Chico for breaking some dishes, but Stanwyck stands up to him and says, if Chico goes, I go. And this sets in motion the nature of their friendship. And it's one of the first movies, and probably because it was pre-code, where Chico and Lily are almost equals.
Yes.
Which was a refreshing and wonderful thing to see.
Exactly. You can actually find this film, not trying to make people buy things from Amazon, but you can rent it for around $3 on Amazon, and it's well worth
It's such a great movie, and it really gives THERESA Harris a chance to shine. You really can see, what she was capable of as an actress, which she didn't get that many opportunities to shine. So this is special.
And you mentioned pre-code. Let's just chat about that for a second, because I think that affects a lot of things for THERESA Harris and other actors and actresses of color.
Oh, absolutely. Once the Hays Codes came into effect in 1934, in essence, this was an organization that would basically dictate the morality of things seen in motion pictures.
Right.
And one of the things that the Hays Code enforced was that people of color could not be shown as equals to white people. Can you imagine?
And that continued for many years.
Yes, absolutely. And so that limited the types of roles that were available to people of color.
Of
So,
course.
any chance that THERESA Harris had for a substantial meaty role was pretty much diminished once these Hays Codes came into law. And also parallel with that, at the same time, the Jim Crow laws were going crazy in the South. So you also had that in play.
Right.
That also hurt people of color who were performers.
Right. Now, in this film, you compare her similarly to the rise of Lena Horne a decade later. I mean, perhaps if Theresa Harris had been born a little bit later, certainly in our time, she would be a huge star right now.
Oh, absolutely. You look at her talent, her beauty, her charisma, that woman would have been a star. But because of the era she was performing in, she was very limited.
Right. Now, the same year she does Babyface, she also does a picture with Ginger Rogers called Professional Sweetheart. And she plays...
Great movie, by the way.
She plays Ginger's maid.
I know, but you know what?
This was an interesting storyline.
This was better. This was a better storyline for her.
Yeah. Ginger Rogers is plucked from obscurity to be America's singing sweetheart on the radio. But she preferred life and love and jazz.
She was a party girl. I mean, she wanted to just go out to the jazz clubs and dance and drink and date, and that was not what America's sweetheart should be on the radio.
Right. So the radio sponsors are not happy with that. Ginger Rogers runs off with her beau, and they hire Theresa Harris's character, Vera, to take Ginger Rogers' place on the radio, threatening Ginger Rogers to come back.
Yeah, it was kind of a great ploy to make Ginger jealous and bring her back into the fold. And it works, of course. But it also shows off the singing prowess of Theresa Harris.
Although, interestingly, when they actually film that scene, you don't see Theresa Harris. You hear her. But they cut to all the white people and their reaction, listening to it. And she, again, received no screen credit.
No screen credit. And she's such an integral part of this plot.
Yes.
Which happened to her time and time again.
Right. She does do some other titles that we all know on this podcast: Horse Feathers in 1932, Gold Diggers of 1933, Morning Glory in 1933, Flying Down to Rio. She had a busy 33.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Broadway Melody of 1936 in, obviously, 1936.
Also in 1936, she has a really wonderful musical number in a movie called Banjo on My Knee, which starred Barbara Stanwyck and Joel McCrea. And she gets to sing that wonderful, mournful blues song, St. Louis Blues. And I think there's a clip for this on YouTube as well, and it's really worth checking out. But again, uncredited.
Right. Now, in 1937, there's something pretty historic that happens. An actor and, I would say, producer writer named Ralph Cooper. He starts his own production company called $1 Million Productions to produce films with all-black casts that dealt with African-American subject matters.
Which unheard of at that time.
Right.
A really historic moment, I think, in black cinema.
And there's a film for which Theresa Harris is the leading lady called originally Bargain with Bullets. It was sold to another production company and re-released as a title called The Gangsters on the Loose. Unfortunately, I think this film is lost from everything you and I have been able to find. And the production company didn't last very long either. But
which is kind of a shame because Ralph Cooper was an interesting fella.
Yeah.
He was this debonair, really good-looking black man. They actually called him the Black Clark Gable or Dark Gable.
Yeah.
And he was really ahead of the curve in terms of creating content for black performers.
Right.
Which I think is fascinating.
And he went on to start the Apollo Theater and the Amateur Night.
He's the one who started Amateur Night at the Apollo Theater.
Amazing.
So really interesting fellow, which actually would make a great subject for a future podcast.
A future episode. Well, and in 1938, unfortunately, Theresa Harris is relegated back to a maid role. Now, this time, she's playing Betty Davis's maid in Jezebel in 1938, and she did receive
at least she got screen credit for this one.
And she's in the film a little bit more.
She is a little bit more. And from what I've read about Theresa Harris, and the same is true for Ralph Cooper, they both lobbied for better parts, and they really, really tried to fight against that stereotypical maid or servant role as best they could.
Right.
One of the films where Harris actually got to show off some considerable acting prowess was a very little-known movie called Tell No Tales from 1939. And she is incredible in this movie. She plays the wife of a murdered boxer, and she gives such an emotionally wrenching performance alongside Melvin Douglas. You really should check it out. And to kind of give you a little taste of that, we've got a clip for you to listen to.
I talked to a doctor just now who treated Jim for a knife wound.
I didn't tell you that. I don't know nothing about that. He was killed by a cop.
That's a good way, too, if you can't stab a man in the back. Now, listen, Ruby. I don't know, and I don't care who was sore at Jim. That's something I'm going to let the cops worry
Oh,
about.
mister, please keep your mouth shut.
What sort of a bad racket was Jim in on the side? You're afraid of the boys that killed Jim, aren't you, Ruby? Jim gave that doctor that fixed him this $100 bill.
I don't know nothing about that.
You can tell that to the cops.
What do you want?
Where did Jim get this?
I gave it to him.
You?
I swear. I gave him everything I got.
Where did you get it?
I work for Miss Lorna Travis. I'm a personal maid. A friend of Miss Lorna's gave it to me last Wednesday. That's the truth.
Gave you this $100 bill? Who was he?
I don't know. He's some big man, I guess. He gave it to me and he said, Ruby, you take good care of Miss Travis, and I'll give you one more like this Christmas. Maybe Jim was in some kind of racket. I don't know. I don't know why they killed him. He was always needing money, and I gave him everything I got. I loved Jim. And I tried to hold him. Now he's dead.
That is certainly a testament to the fact that she should have had more opportunities.
I know, such a wonderful, wonderful actress.
Well, before we move on with her career, let's jump into this week's Hollywood Pop Quiz.
All right, and the pop quiz question today is, and this is interesting, I love this question. Whenever THERESA Harris appeared in a film, obviously it was a small part because that's what she could get. Black theaters that operated in predominantly black neighborhoods, they used to do a very unorthodox marketing technique to help sell tickets to these mainstream movies. What did they do that drew in the crowds?
Ooh, I think I might know this one.
It's good.
All right, we will have the answer and more about the luminescent THERESA Harris after this.
All right, Steve and Ann will be right back, but first, another stop on the Hollywood tour. Long before Joan Crawford became Joan Crawford, she was Lucille Fay LeSueur. Now, studios didn't exactly downplay that they made Hollywood hopefuls adopt stage names, but in Crawford's case, MGM took a different route. They quite literally ran a public contest, promising a cash prize to whoever submitted the winning name. Joan Arden was the first choice, but as the official story goes, another actress already went by that name, so MGM settled on Joan Crawford. Now, though the name eventually grew on her, Crawford initially hated the sound of it. She said it sounded too much like crawfish. And now back to Steve and Ann from Beneath the Hollywood Sign.
Welcome back, everybody. And before we get further into THERESA Harris's life and career, we just wanted to give a big shout out to our listener of the week. And this week, it is Tom Johnson. Tom has been with us from the get-go, and he has actually given us some great emails, some great suggestions. And Tom knows his stuff, let me tell you. He's really there to keep us on our toes. So thank you, Tom, for all your support. We love having you on board.
Thanks, Tom. So THERESA Harris follows up Tell No Tales in 1939 with Buck Benny Rides Again, 1940, and this is with Eddie Rochester Anderson, who is
so
just
delightful. And
so
the
wonderful.
two of them together,
Oh my gosh.
their chemistry is, and this movie is wonderful.
And the dancing and the singing.
Yes, it's great. And it also stars Jack Benny. The way that we are introduced to THERESA Harris in this movie, and it's really fun, Jack Benny sends Eddie Rochester Anderson to deliver a note and some candy to this young lady that he's trying to woo, played by Ellen Drew. Well, Anderson goes to the apartment, and with the doors open, standing before us is this vision of beauty and loveliness that overwhelms him. It's not Ellen Drew. It's her maid, Josephine, played by the beautiful THERESA Harris.
Darn right.
Absolutely. And so, of course, Anderson is gobsmacked over this woman. He's, his tongue's hanging out. He is very enthralled with her, so he begins to court her. And they perform one of the most wonderful song and dance numbers in this movie called My My, which I think is the highlight of the film.
It's really terrific. Yeah.
And this might have been the very first film I ever noticed Theresa Harris in.
Yeah.
And it was because of this number with Eddie Rochester Anderson that really made me sit up and say, who is this incredible actress?
Yes, yes. Well, she follows that film with a few more thankless maid roles. I mean, there's What's Buzzin' Cousin, 1943.
And again, she's teamed up with Eddie Rochester Anderson in these movies.
And some of these titles, again, they're ones that you would know, and if you go back and watch them, you'll be able to see her. Blossoms in the Dust, 1941.
Yeah, blink and you'll miss her in that one.
Our Wife, 1941. Cat People, which we've talked about on this podcast.
Yeah, and she's actually really, really fun in that movie. She plays Minnie, the waitress of the local diner. And, she's got a little sarcastic edge to her.
Yeah.
Which is really rare that they gave these types of characters any kind of personality. So it's nice to see this.
Right. In addition to that film, which I would characterize as a thriller, she also does I Walked with a Zombie in 1943.
Yes, and this is a really great part for her. Again, it's still a little stereotypical because she plays this island woman who kind of works as a maid for Frances D, who plays this nurse who's come onto this island to help this woman who's fallen under this voodoo coma. And it's Theresa Harris's character that suggests to Frances D that they go find the witch doctor because he can help get the woman out of the coma.
Right.
So she kind of sets the whole thing in motion.
Okay. Well, in 1945, she's in The Dolly Sisters. In 1946, Three Little Girls in Blue. And one of my favorite films, Miracle on 34th Street from 1947.
Yeah, so she's in some really great movies. She's opposite some really major stars.
But she just keeps playing the same thing.
She keeps playing the same role.
Because they won't let her play anything else.
Exactly. She does get an interesting and very pivotal role in one of the great film noirs of all time, Out of the Past, 1947. She plays Katie Moffat, played by Jane Greer's maid, who actually has information that Robert Mitchum needs to get. And so he comes to this nightclub where she and her boyfriend are out on the town, and she's in this great outfit and this hat, and she's drinking and having a good time. So it was nice to see her outside of a maid uniform.
Yes, yes. Now, the remainder of her film roles are not very memorable.
Not at all.
But
although she's really good in Angel Face. That's one with Gene Simmons and Robert Mitchum again, where she plays a nurse, Teresa. And what I find interesting about her role in this movie is that she really fought against doing any type of stereotypical dialect. When you hear Nurse Teresa speak, it's crystal clear English, the way she spoke.
Right.
And I love that she fought for that.
Yes. Now, the 50s bring many of our classic cinema stars into television.
Yes.
And Theresa Harris is no exception. She gets slightly better roles in the 50s.
She does. She appears on the Loretta Young Show. She appears on Lux Radio Hour. And she also gets to play an heiress in an episode of How to Marry a Millionaire in 1956, which, of course, was the TV version based on the movie.
Okay.
Another cool thing that happened in September of 1952, we're going to go back a little bit, is that Theresa Harris appeared on the cover of Jet magazine, which was kind of a major deal for her. The article was a nice article. It was sort of a fluff piece, but it mainly dealt with how the talented actress remained frustrated by the lack of opportunities for black performers. The article concludes with a quote from Harris, and she says, "All I can do is keep plugging and hoping." Oh, I know.
Yeah. So, in 1958, Theresa Harris retires from film. And who could kind of blame her, right?
Who could blame her? I know. And she wasn't that old, but she had invested her money very wisely, and she'd married a doctor.
Well, there you go.
So her retirement was quite comfortable.
Yeah. She was also active in politics, a lifelong Democrat, and she campaigned for Adlai Stevenson during the 1952 presidential election.
And then in 1974, she was inducted into the Black Filmmakers Hall of Fame, which was quite an honor. And on October the 8th, 1985, she passed away at the age of 78 in Inglewood, California. And she's buried in the Angeles Rosedale Cemetery here in Los Angeles.
Oh.
I've been to her grave.
Have you?
I have.
Oh, that's wonderful. And Theresa Harris actually lives on in an off-Broadway play by the Pulitzer Prize-winning Lynn Nottage. It's a play called By the Way, Meet Vera Stark, and she was inspired by Theresa Harris playing maids.
The maid.
Right?
Yeah, I think I read an interview with Lynn Nottage, and she said that she was specifically struck by her performance in Babyface. This is what inspired this play. And the play, it's a screwball comedy that takes place in the 1930s, and it centers around this headstrong African-American maid who's also a budding actress.
Playing opposite a white woman.
Yes.
Yeah.
And of course, it gets into the racial dynamics of the time
Right.
in a very humorous way.
Yeah, well, Lynn Nottage is one of my favorites, and the play was nominated for several Drama Desk awards in 2012.
Yeah, absolutely. While she was never given many opportunities to sink her teeth into meaty roles because of the racial inequality of the era, Theresa Harris did manage to bring intelligence and dignity to her role. While she often supplied comic relief, she never allowed herself to become a comic buffoon.
Right.
She had such charisma and such a strong screen presence that it makes me sad to think of what she could have accomplished had she been born a little later. Undoubtedly, with her beauty and her talent, she should have been a leading lady, but it just wasn't to be.
Well, more people will now know about her because of our podcast.
Absolutely.
I think Theresa Harris herself characterizes her career in a really interesting way. Quote, I never had the chance to rise above the role of maid in Hollywood movies. My color was against me any way you looked at it. The fact that I was not hot stamped me either as uppity or relegated me to the eternal role of stooge or servant. I can sing, but so can hundreds of other girls. Hollywood had no parts for me.
I think she was very aware of her situation.
Correct.
Yeah.
Steve, what would be, for our listeners, 3 films that you would recommend to see Theresa Harris in action?
Oh, that's a good question, because unfortunately, most of her screen performances are in very, very small parts. But my 3 would be, you have to see Babyface, 1933. I mean, she gives an outstanding performance. She goes toe-to-toe with Barbara Stanwyck and holds her own. And it's just a great role for her.
Yeah.
I would definitely say that one. I would even say Buck Benny Rides Again. If nothing else, for the screen chemistry that she has with Eddie Rochester Anderson, and their song and dance number together is just incredible. You have to see it.
Yes.
And then I think for my 3rd film for Theresa Harris, God, it's tough, but I think I would probably go with Professional Sweetheart with Ginger Rogers. It's a really pivotal role in terms of how her character influences the plot.
Right.
And it's a different role for her, and she's really wonderful.
And we mentioned Babyface. You can rent it on Amazon. Buck Benny Rides Again is on the Internet Archive.
I think so, yes.
Professional Sweetheart I was not able to find, but check out TCM because it regularly plays that film.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you, Steve. This has been a fascinating dive into a wonderful actress's career. And let's hear the answer to this week's Hollywood Pop Quiz.
Well, the question was, whenever Theresa Harris appeared in a film, black theaters in predominantly black neighborhoods would do this very unorthodox marketing technique to help sell tickets within that neighborhood. And what they would do, they would put Theresa Harris's name on the marquee, and that would draw in the black theater goers. So instead of Babyface starring Barbara Stanwyck, it would be Babyface starring Theresa Harris.
Yeah, baby.
I love that they did that, and I love that it worked, because people would see that she was in a movie and they wanted to go see her. So.
And if only those studio heads could have figured that out, she'd be a big old star.
Yes.
Well, thanks everybody for listening. We would love it if you would give us a 5-star review and if you would follow us on social media. We are on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. You can watch the podcast on YouTube. Our handle is @FromBeneathTheHollywood
And we love hearing from you, so please keep those emails coming. You can reach us at info@FromBeneathTheHollywoodSign.com.
That's this week's view.
From Beneath the Hollywood Sign.
You've been listening to From Beneath the Hollywood Sign with Steve Cubine and Nan McNamara. McNamara, the podcast that celebrates amazing stories of Tinseltown from its golden era. Join us next week for another episode and learn something else about Hollywood you probably never knew. Take a moment and give us a 5-star rating and a positive review. And tell your friends about us too. It'll help grow the podcast. Visit Steve's website at FromBeneathTheHollywoodSign.com. The executive producers are Steve Cubine and Nan McNamara. Executive producer and post-production supervisor Lindsay Schnebley. This podcast is part of the Airwave Media Podcast Network. Visit airwavemedia.com to listen and subscribe to their other fine shows like The Box of Oddities and The Shallow End with Schnebley and Toth. Copyright 2024, all rights reserved. That's a wrap.